Good evening, everybody. Happy 2022. We're so glad you're with us tonight. My name is Julie Evans. I'm the Executive Director of Roots and Roads Community Hospice Foundation. And for those of you who have joined us before, last year was our first year going virtual, and we had a really successful first go at wading into this virtual world of education. We had about 1,000 registrants join us for the various sessions throughout 2021. And we're really excited about our new lineup in 2022. So again, thank you for joining us. And we're really excited to have our friends from Banner Alzheimer's Institute join us tonight to talk about ambiguous loss. If you're just coming into the room, you'll see a pre-poll up on your screen. Please take a moment to answer it so that our guests can know who's with us tonight and sort of gear the conversation to who's in the room. Jen, do you mind forwarding our PowerPoint? And also, if anybody's putting comments in, you've got to tell me to put my glasses on because I'm trying to be all cool without my glasses right now. So tonight we're on a Zoom webinar platform. So what that means is that we won't see you and we won't be able to hear you, but we definitely want to hear from you. So please use, as is shown on the screen, the tools at the bottom there on the bottom row, whether it's chat, and that's more for like technical issues if you don't have sound or something like that. And then questions for the presenters, please use the Q&A feature and we'll get to as many of those questions as we can. Next slide, please. So a little bit about our organization. Our vision is to transform the end of life experience into the final act of living well. And we really try to do that in 3 distinct ways. One is providing financial support for hospice patients and their families, because as we all know, there are so many expenses that are not covered by health insurance. So that's one area. Another area is education about end-of-life issues, which is what we're all here for tonight. And then the third area is end-of-life care grants. And we'll learn a little bit more about that later. Go ahead, Jen, and next. Yeah. So in 2021, I won't read these stats, please take a moment just to read through. This tells a little bit more in depth about that work that we do. Next slide, please. Oh, is this where I get out of the way and David takes over? I'm so glad you're here, Jennifer, to keep me on track. And now I'd like to introduce David Fife, our Director of Community Engagement, who will introduce tonight's guest speaker, Lord. David?
Thanks so much, Julie. We are very pleased to have Lori Nisson with us tonight, and also Veronica Connor from Banner as well. It's so good to have her with us. And as Julie said, we're so happy to have all of our participants. Last year, we had no idea what to expect when we went to this virtual platform. And as Julie said, it allowed folks from many different places, not only in the US, but around the world, to be able to join us. But I think it had another benefit as well, is that we engage in some pretty personal and vulnerable questions and topics. And this allows us to be at home and to feel like we're in a safe space. And that's what we want to create here. We want to create a space where you feel safe, ability to ask the questions or make the comments that have been on your heart and mind. And hopefully together, and I'm sure that Lori feels this way as well, that it's out of these types of discussions that we all learn. And it's a process for each one of us, whether we've been doing this for a couple years or 20 years. It is something that we all benefit from and can learn from one another. As we mentioned earlier, we invite you to put questions into the Q&A box that's at the bottom of your screen. You just go ahead and click on that box, type in your question, and we'll get to as many of them as possible this evening as time allows. All right. I want to warmly welcome Lori Nissen to this evening. It's you can see from her bio that's up on your screen. Hopefully, you've been reading it as I've been going on and on, as I sometimes do. But Lori brings a wealth of information and background and experience to this conversation. And so we are very anxious to hear her presentation, but then also engage with all of our participants to see where the discussion goes after that. So, Lori, thank you so much for being with us tonight, and we'll turn things over to you.
So welcome, everybody. We're going to talk about ambiguous loss. And I was just telling the group before we went entirely virtual in our universe, I used to worry about questions that you might ask me. And now all I worry about is the technology and whether it's going to serve me well. So we're going to talk about ambiguous loss, which is really a concept that has been life-changing for me as a licensed clinical social worker of 20-some years, and having the pleasure of working with people and families living with neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. And I want to tell you about this concept. I want to tell you why I think it's important and how it's a little bit different from a traditional grief and loss, and really just help you learn some new strategies to increase your tolerance for ambiguity and change. So what is ambiguous loss? Ambiguous loss is a loss that's really unclear, does not have any resolution, and no closure. So it was coined years ago as Dr. Pauline Boss, who's now in her 80s, was actually a graduate student and working towards her PhD. And she applied this concept in a lot of different ways, and then wrote a book called Loving Someone with Dementia, whereby she really applies the concept of ambiguous loss to people and families living with dementia. So dementia can create a lot of ambiguity for both a care partner, family member, friend, and also for the person who's living with the disease themselves, particularly if they have insight and awareness into their disease. So in this case, we have a person who's physically present, but psychologically or emotionally changed or absent. And so I think this is really a missing link in that caregivers often report a lot of caregiver stress and burden. And this really helps us, I think, get at the core. And when I say it was life-changing in the work that I do in helping to support people, I think supportive counseling really only goes so far. And ambiguous loss really gives us some tangible tools to identify what's really going on when, as a caregiver, you might feel like you're hitting your head against a wall. And this unique form of grief really helps us understand losses that are related to someone who's absent and present in the same time, at the same place. So with ambiguous loss, there's lots of great examples that apply here. When we have the physical body that's absent or changed, but psychologically the person is still with us. Great examples of that are the Malaysian air flight. So I started at Banner in March of 2014. And this was when that Malaysian aircraft just disappeared from the sky with 300 passengers. And so, their family members were wondering, is that person here or gone? I'm not sure, right? And so that creates a lot of ambiguity and a lot of angst. It could also apply to, a soldier missing in action, a prisoner of war, if we don't know if that person's living or has been killed. And so I think it's a really poignant term. It really helps us put our brains around experiencing loss when the person's not died, or we're not sure if they're died, but they're different than they once were, or our connection with them is different. So in dementia, as I explained, it's much more obvious. The body is present, but psychologically the person has changed or is emotionally different from who they had been, as their cognitive skills wane, their functional skills wane. And often, because dementia affects the brain, this is a brain disease, the frontal lobe is what gives us ability to have good insight and judgment. And so often, not always, but often the person isn't even aware of their dementia. And this can be incredibly frightening and difficult and challenging for a care partner to manage. So what's difficult about ambiguous loss is it's not traditional. So if someone dies, in our society, we kind of know what to do based on your culture, your cultural preferences, maybe religious preferences or societal preferences, right? So you might send flowers, send a sympathy card, you might bring that person a casserole, you might check in on them to see how they're doing, and talk with them about that loss. But with dementia, that's different. People don't understand that you, as a care partner, family member, friend, might be experiencing grief and loss, because your person's there, right? So it's confusing and it's non-traditional, and so we don't know how to handle it. And so you often hear family caregivers in many of our support groups, and I'm sure our Roots and Road teams hears this as well in their hospice program and in support groups, that people around me just don't understand what I'm experiencing. And often because of that, the situation becomes awkward and they often bow out. And so this increases exponentially the kind of isolation that people and caregivers often feel once there's a diagnosis and the person is progressing. And we hear this a lot as well with, families who are living with Parkinson's disease similarly. So the changes that we see are often really confusing and unpredictable, right? And so we say things like, if you've seen one person with Alzheimer's disease, you've only seen one person, right? Meaning that the disease translates, the symptomology and how people experience it is unique for each person. And so the changes can be really confusing and unpredictable. And what's difficult is that once the family has kind of gotten their arms around this disease, which is very long, the average course of Alzheimer's or related dementia is 8 to 10 years or more. And so it's a very long disease, but it can be very unpredictable. The person, depending on what type of dementia they have, for example, Lewy body dementia, which is the second most common type right after Alzheimer's disease, the person's mentation is really variable. I mean, one day or one moment, they can seem really sharp and really right on. And then a few moments or the next day, not at all. And so that creates a lot of ambiguity and unpredictability. And this is a disease to which we don't have a magic pill or a magic cure or a magical way to prevent it. And so it can create a lot of ambiguity and a lot of angst in families as they're trying to manage this disease, this long disease. So I think the basic premise that we're talking about here is that we have absence and presence at the same time. So someone is here and we should celebrate their strengths, but they've lost some of their abilities. Often the reciprocity that happens in relationships changes. So that in itself can be in particular very painful for a care partner, especially maybe a partner or spouse, because that person has often been their emotional support. So whereby if we're having a conversation about cancer, we might sit down, and if Julie was a family member of mine, we might sit down and talk about the disease and talk about plans for the future and how we would manage treatment and what would happen if we needed more help or more care, or what would happen even if I were to die. How would we manage that, or how should we prepare for that? How should we talk about end of life? And all those things that are painful, but we would participate in that conversation together. But if Julie had dementia and she didn't have awareness of the disease, we couldn't have those conversations. And not only that, she might not even have empathy or understanding for what I was going through as a partner, not because she is callous, but because her ability to have compassion and that reciprocity in the relationship and empathy is impaired as a result of this brain disease. So it makes things really complicated. So it differs from a traditional loss and grief, as I mentioned, right? And people have continued losses throughout the course. So, as a care partner, I might get the hang of things in the early stage, and then boom, something changes. The medical provider tells me that my person can no longer drive. And wow, that's a big loss, right? Because now I've got to deal with handling that when that's a loss of their independence. So they're going to be upset about it. And it's another thing that's added to my shoulders, is I've got to make sure they get where they need to go if they're not driving. And then so there's these losses along the way. I had a family caregiver I was working with over time in counseling. He was taking care of his longtime partner. And they'd be going along, and then he would say she threw out, life would be okay, we'd be enjoying ourselves, and then she'd throw out a zinger. So he was giving this example about how they were, the day before they'd picked out new furniture for their family room. They were really excited about it. She participated in that. And the next day they'd ordered it. It was going to be delivered the next week, and they're driving along, and she looks at him and says, "So when do you think we should pick out that new furniture?" And he's like, "Oh," and he called it a zinger. And I thought that was really interesting. So you're kind of moving along, and then these losses kind of hit you in the face. And so these continued losses throughout the course, everything from the loss of ability to drive, to transitioning to implementing care, to having to do hands-on care as the person's functional abilities change. The person may be mobile and running or walking quite well. And as the disease progresses, you see this cognitive decline, and then you're also seeing a functional decline to where I'm having to provide a device, and then as the disease progresses, maybe a wheelchair. And first the person is dressing themselves and bathing themselves just perfectly, and then I've got to pick out clothes, and then I've got to start actually helping the person put on their clothes, and so on. So what happens here is that it confuses relationships. So you hear about where this person was my partner or spouse, and we were intimate, and often in support groups, caregivers will say, "I don't feel like a spouse anymore. I feel like a caregiver." And being intimate seems strange to me. It's not even on my radar. So it really confuses relationships. Am I an adult daughter? Or as my parent declines, I'm taking over things. I almost feel more like a parent. And so this really confuses relationships. And there hasn't been a good roadmap or a good understanding of what this culprit is. And so that's why I think this ambiguous loss work and understanding is really helpful. So as Dr. Boss, and I've had the pleasure of meeting her a handful of times, brilliant lady, says, it's important to grieve as you go. So it's like this fine balance of, do I spend the next 10 years grieving? No, I've got to grieve these losses, but I also have to celebrate what I still have and celebrate the person's strengths. And I see that a lot when I have the opportunity to work with a new dyad person and with a disease and care partner, and the person is in the mild cognitive impairment stage, which is even before dementia. And they walk in my office like they've been given a death sentence. And so it's this fine balance of grieving the losses and being realistic and expecting change and decline. But then this person's so highly functional, we've forgotten about all the strengths they still have. So it's this really this fine balance that we're asking people to manage, which is not easy by any sense of the word. So some of the losses that we see due to dementia, and I thought this was great. The Alzheimer Society is in the UK. They're like our Alzheimer's Association in the United States. And I have adapted this a little bit, but I think, the losses that come with Alzheimer's and a related dementia are dynamic, they're multifaceted. So, there's the loss or change in the relationship as we explored and expressed. There might be changes in intimacy. The person with dementia may not want to be intimate, or the care partner might not want to be intimate, or just I'm having trouble getting my head straight about our identity and our roles. The companionship, support, and understanding, that reciprocity in the relationship, deteriorates as the person loses their cognitive abilities. Communication changes as a person's brain changes and their ability to communicate conventionally. And that creates all kinds of problems. I've been talking to my parent or partner or sister for, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years this way. And now you're telling me it doesn't work. You're telling me to avoid arguments. You're telling me not to reorient them to time and place. You're telling me, not to argue with them when they're saying things that don't even make sense. And so that is a big burden and big challenge and big change. And for some people, they adapt easily. And for others of us, it's hard. It's a big learning curve. Shared hobbies. So if we both played bridge and we really enjoyed bridge, but now I'm losing my ability or my executive functioning, my ability to play a complex game like that, there goes our hobbies. And, if you're not playing, then I'm not playing. And so it gets really complicated. And then the freedom to take part in activities or work. So, your ability to as the person's partner, or adult child, or, whatever your relationship is, that spontaneity is no longer there, because now you've got to make sure that you're looking out for their safety and meeting their needs, which many people do very graciously, and they're glad to be able to take care of this person, but it does create losses for them, as well as lifestyle and future plans, right? And implementing care. So I always give this example. We all have this, fantasy of, of living to be, 92, and living in our own home and driving until that time, and taking classes at the community center, and maybe using some nice services from the Pima Council on Aging. But then we're just planning to die the next day, right? Overnight. All of us just think that that's how it's going to happen. But that's not really how it happens for a lot of people. They have a complex medical issue or a complex cognitive issue like dementia or Parkinson's disease, and that's really hard. And then, of course, implementing care is really difficult, particularly if you have someone who doesn't even recognize that they need help. So that can create lots of conflict and confusion. So why is this work important? So understanding ambiguous loss really provides a pathway for a caregiver to accept with and live with a new reality. So it's about changing our perceptions. So, ambiguity, wow. You all have to be experts in ambiguity if you're living with dementia, but all of us are, just from living with pandemic times for almost 2 years right now, right? So, in March of 2020, when our senior leadership told me to leave our office, I thought, a month, I'll take my stuff and I'll be back. And none of us, I think, could imagine that we'd have this ambiguous lifestyle, so much ambiguity for, months and months and months, if not, 2 years or more. And so what we have to do is change our perception. And that always sounds easy. And honestly, once you master it, it's really the key to life, right? Is changing how you frame things. So it allows us to appreciate the person with dementia for how they are now and who they are now, instead of what we do as human beings, right? We spend our entire lives like looking back on the past and wishing we had that person back, or we're the same way they were, or we're looking so far ahead into the future that we think, oh my gosh, how am I going to be able to take care of my loved one well as this condition progresses? I'm not sure I can do that. And so we're constantly in this state of anxiety, whereby we're, longing for who they were, and then worrying about the future of who they're going to become and how I'm going to manage it. That what happens? We miss out on this perfection, which is, this is the person's very best day. So we miss out on that, and we forget to think about that. Yes, we're living with a chronic progressive illness, but there could still be a lot of really good times. I just have to be aware of it and pay attention to it, right? And so it's a more effective use of energy, and it really redefines our relationship. So I'm sure you did a lot of this in the pandemic. And if you are a caregiver, somebody with dementia, this was even harder for you, because you're taking care of somebody. Now you're trying to make sure you both stay safe. You're managing who can come in and out of your house, and how do I balance, safety with sanity? Meaning, at some point I'm going to need some respite, but I'm not sure if that's even safe to do. So it really allows us to appreciate the person for who they are now, instead of longing for who they once were. And that is a more effective use of energy. So as a clinical social worker and a therapist, I always say to people in counseling, you only have so much energy, right? You have to decide how you're going to spend it. And we have to redefine our relationship. So we have to change our perception. We cannot control the disease, and you sometimes see people trying to do that. I had a gentleman who was taking care of his wife, and she was in the early stages, and he had her, this was a few years ago, had her flying all over the country to get consultations, and then all over the world to get consultations from, these extremists who thought and told him, if you do this to her diet, or you change this, then she'll be able to get back to baseline to who she was. And it wasn't quite true. And he wasted a lot of time and energy doing that with good intentions, right? Who doesn't want to restore their person's cognition and who they were? It would be, miraculous to be able to do that, but it wasn't a very good use of his energy and time. And he found himself very fried, and she was only in the mild stages. So we can't control the disease, but we can control or change our perceptions, right? And so the pandemic is a perfect example of that. So at first you were probably very angry and frustrated and, pacing your floors. And then you figured out a way to relieve that stress, right? You had to change your perception, right? This is only temporary. I can manage it. I'm very much somebody who really enjoyed going to the gym. And for me, the gym is not just physical, it's emotional. It really helps me blow off steam. And I felt like a caged animal the first few days of the pandemic. And I was like, I've got to get back to the gym. I got to get back to the gym. And it's like, you're not going to get back to the gym. You can't control COVID, right? That's unrealistic, but you can control how you respond or perceive it. And so I had to reframe my perceptions. I had to accept what it was and find new connections and new ways to connect with people. So we started having a family call. My family's across the country every Sunday on Zoom. And so we were able to see each other. We never had done that. So we were staying in touch more. I found taking my dog for a walk every morning very early for a few miles was really helpful to both of us. And I saw things in nature I'd never seen before. So not to minimize the pandemic and not to minimize dementia, because both are very challenging. But it's how you frame things that helps you cope. It helps us find hope. It helps us find a pathway to live with it and manage it and be successful. It's a conscious choice to change the way we see things, right? And so if someone in your family gets a diagnosis of cancer or Parkinson's or dementia, or whatever that is, you can think of it like, oh my gosh, life is over, or, and it's okay to grieve that. But then you have to take a step back and think, well, okay, it's not all or nothing. We still can really enjoy our lives, but I really have to change my attitude about it, right? It helps us appreciate the positive moments and the funny moments, and there are lots of them, dementia or not. And it helps us connect with the person as they are now with the disease and not just focus on who they had been. So it provides guidelines to help us develop our own plan of care for the person we care about while caring for ourselves simultaneously. So this is very different from how I learned paradoxical thinking in psychology in my undergraduate program. So paradoxical thinking is something that Dr. Boss talks about, where you hold two opposing ideas in your head at the same time. And so we have to take care of somebody else and take care of ourselves, which is really contradictory to what we believe, right? Most of the caregivers I've worked with are excellent, despite their training or background. I mean, they're really trying hard, but they pour all of their energy into the person they're caring for, and often at their own self-neglect. And so what happens is they end up getting sick, or they end up getting, developing depression or an anxiety disorder because they have not made time to take care of themselves. And when people like me, innocently say, you really have to take care of yourself, they're like, if someone gives me one more thing to do, I don't want to tell you what I'm going to do, because it is difficult. But what Dr. Boss says is, with a little help, people can learn to balance their grief over what was lost with a recognition of what is still possible. So why is this important? You want to know. It offers fluid considerations and towards the development of our own plan as care partners, family members. It allows us to provide care and take care of ourselves as a care partner. It increases our comfort with ambiguity of the situation and future situations, right? So certain things like dementia and pandemics raise our awareness of how ambiguous life is. But life hasn't always been ambiguous, right? So if I could actually see all of you, I'd have you raise your hands. But I'll just ask you to think about my question here, which is, so when you were 18 and maybe you were graduating high school, maybe you're going on to some specialty training or college or your first real job, maybe you were getting married, who knows? And think about how you imagined your life at that time. And now I'm going to ask you to raise your hand in your own place, or at least for yourself. How many of you can say that your life turned out exactly the way you thought it would? And when I have had the pleasure of doing this face to face with folks, typically nobody raises their hands, right? Because life is ambiguous, right? We start out in one marriage and maybe the person dies unexpectedly, or we get divorced. We think we're going to have a lot of children, and that never happens. We think we know what our career is going to be because we studied one thing and we never even land a position in that field, or we end up doing something totally different. People have, dementia is difficult, but sometimes dementia isn't the worst thing that's happened to people. I mean, people have lived through pandemics and economic downturns and lost children, unexpectedly at young ages. Dealt with their own cancer or other health problems. So my point is not to minimize these conditions. It's just to say that you're a survivor and you've lived with ambiguity your whole life. You just haven't really paid attention to it until it was literally blew up in your face with a diagnosis of dementia or with something like a pandemic. So we have to be more comfortable in not knowing the ending, right? And we've all learned that the last 18 months or more. So why is it important? Caregiving can make you stronger, and really shaping the way you think about dementia and these challenges really can make you stronger and help you grow. Flexibility in the way you think increases your ability to be strong. And so that's why I'm bringing up all these other hurdles you've experienced in your lifetime, because it's good. It's given you life experience. And the more life experience you have over these really challenging experiences, you learn something. You don't want to have to go through them, but you learn something and you build your strength and resilience. And so the adaptation of what I'm asking you to do requires us to see the upside of a situation, right? So I'll give a really simplistic version. My brother-in-law is married to my sister. They have 2 small children, and my brother-in-law has a job by which he traveled most weeks of the year. Well, then the pandemic happened and his travel stopped immediately. And everyone was feeling very cooped up with, preschool not in session, and the 2 of them trying to work from home while they have 2 small kids and trying to do that successfully, right? Not as difficult as many other people, but everybody has their own toothache, right? Everybody has their own challenge. And what they learned was the upside of the situation is they got to spend a lot of time together as a family that they'd never had before. And my brother-in-law got to experience my nieces and see changes in them day to day as they're growing. So just a small example. So we have to learn to tolerate and feel uncomfortable with the uncertainty of life, because that's just life in the fast lane, right? For all of us. It increases our maturity. And we have to, as I like to say, we have to get out of our own way. When I was, stressed about not being able to go to the gym or go into my office, and I'm, burning a hole through my rug, I'm in my own way, right? I have to stop resisting a challenge and begin to go with the flow. And dementia's like that. It's okay to grieve it. But at some point, you have to get out of your own way and realize I don't have control over the disease and the progression, but I do have control over how I take care of my person and how I take care of myself and how I see our lives at this point in time and how I'm going to view it as things change. So how to begin? You got to name the problem. So often I would work with family caregivers who were banging their heads against the wall. They were really angry. They weren't ready to take rest, but they weren't ready to take recommendations. They didn't want to shift their communication. They were just pissed off, and they had a right to be, right? But when I introduced this concept to them, and I've introduced it to people as caregivers and people with dementia and Parkinson's disease in early stages, it's life-changing. People have aha moments. So name the problem. I think what you might be experiencing is ambiguous loss. You're grieving some of the losses that you're experiencing as you have this new diagnosis with dementia, and you're losing some of your abilities. But we have to celebrate what you still have. And same with a care partner. You're grieving the loss of someone who's here, but not here in the same way. We're grieving the loss or the change in somebody with Parkinson's who maybe is emotionally different or emotionally the same early in the disease, but functionally and their mobility and their tremors make them physically different from who they once were. And so helping us name the problem can help us recognize that this is a partial loss that creates ambiguity. it's a barrier to coping and grieving. So sometimes that's when we're really frustrated, we're overwhelmed, we can't take it. No one can give us any recommendations because we're not ready to hear those. And then this paradoxical thinking of holding two opposing thoughts in your brain at the same time. There is no right answer. We have to trust that things will work out. So this is my first question for you in the chat. As a result of caregiving, I have lost and I have gained. So if you could humor me, if you're comfortable, please share something in the chat, because I think this is a really difficult exercise, and I think it's a really good exercise. Well, I see someone has made a comment just in the chat about ambiguous loss. Learning about ambiguous loss was an incredible moment. I felt so unheard until learning about it. So thank you for sharing that, Pamela. I really appreciate it. Comments. I've lost solid nights of sleep and I've gained weight. Well, I appreciate your challenge there, and how difficult this exercise really is. So I'm going to give another example of someone who actually tried to place something of a loss and then a gain that was positive. And I think Denise nailed it. And again, this is a really hard exercise. Your brain doesn't always think this way, so keep working at it. So I've lost sleep and gained perspective. That's a very good example. I've lost the counsel of my parent and gained patience. Thank you. That's a beautiful example. These are great examples. You guys are so good at this. I'm so impressed. I've lost my freedom and gained precious time with my loved one. That's wonderful. Lost time with friends and gained the knowledge on how compassionate I could be. You guys are choking me up. Lost myself, but gained myself. So I lost parts, but I also probably gained experience and ability. I've lost feeling protected by my parents, but I've gained compassion and maturity. That's beautiful. Thank you. I'm making sure that I don't miss any of these because they're so impressive. I've lost my private time, but I've gained a more loving relationship. That's very poignant. I've lost the need to always be on the move. I've gained the ability to relax and feel more secure with myself. Wow, Alan, that is incredible. I lost my partner that I've had for 39 years, not dementia, but cancer caregiving, and I've discovered strengths I didn't know I had. Incredible. I've lost social interactions, but gained back spiritual life. I think that's incredible. Lost myself, but gained myself. I think I've reviewed that one already. These are just incredible. So I really commend all of you, because most people don't get this on the first try. It's really hard. I was giving a talk on this in Northern Arizona, and I had a gentleman who tried this exercise, and he said, as a result of caregiving, I've lost my spontaneity. So my ability to just jump in my little convertible and go where I want, do what I want, don't think about things, because I'm taking care of my wife and I need to make sure that she's well and supervised. But I've gained a dance partner. I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. What does that mean? Well, my wife and I have been married for many years, and I am a great dancer, and she has always been too self-conscious. So we've never danced together. She never wanted to dance in public and wouldn't do it. But now that she's less inhibited as a result of her dementia, she not only dances, but loves to dance. And we dance together in our afternoon, most afternoons. And I thought, wow, that's really beautiful. So keep working at it. We can find less than perfect solutions by finding the middle ground. And if both of your answers were feeling like loss, that's okay. It's okay to grieve your losses and give yourself that space and time. You just don't want to get too stuck there, because then what happens is you lose out. And when you're not well emotionally, the person with dementia is going to translate that, right? They often mirror emotion. So we realize we cannot change the course of dementia, but we can change our perceptions by accepting less than perfect solutions. And again, we don't realize it, but we do this all the time, right? We become partners with someone who is not perfect. We marry people that are not perfect. We take jobs that are not perfect. We have kids that we think are perfect, but when we look back, we realize they're not perfect, right? Life is not perfect, right? We accept less than perfect solutions every day. We can do it. So guidelines to cope. We've got to find meaning in a relationship that is and how it is now. We have to balance our need to control everything with acceptance. And this is sometimes hard for people who do like to control everything or are more rigid. We have to sometimes let go of that control and be more accepting. We have to broaden our identity. You can actually be a daughter and a caregiver at the same time. You can be a spouse or partner and a caregiver at the same time. You just have to realize it and take the time to think it over, process it, and get your brain around it. You have to manage your mixed emotions. Often caregiving can feel like a roller coaster. We've heard that a lot from many people, and it does. And it's okay to have mixed emotions, but to realize them and to do things that are going to help you cope with your to manage your mixed emotions. Hold on and let go. This is really interesting. So you have to revise your attachment. We have to let go of the person and who they were while remembering that the person is both here and not here. We have to grieve what you lost and celebrate what you still have. We have to find new human connections. So if your person living with dementia was your sole support system, you have a choice, right? You can be pissed about it. You can say, no one's ever going to care about me or listen to me or have empathy for me or problem solve with me ever again, right? And so it's okay to have that emotion, but then you got to do something about it, right? Or you're going to be stuck. And caregivers who don't get respite, who don't get support along this journey don't do well. I mean, I can almost guarantee that. So you have to find new human connections to meet those needs, whether it's in a support group or a close friend or a family member. And we have to let go of that expectation of closure. We know what the disease looks like. We know what a typical progression is like. We know what the average course is like, but your person is going to be unique. And so we have to let go of that expectation of closure. And we have to keep in mind that the attachment may remain, but it's okay that the relationship is changed and different. And we should expect and accept it to be less reciprocal. There was a caregiver in one of our Parkinson's support groups many years ago who lived in the UK, and she came in to visit her parents quarterly, and she'd often come to our coffee talk persons with and care partners of people with Parkinson's. And she said something I thought we all know intellectually, but I thought it was really poignant. She said, whenever I get really frustrated with my partner, at my job, with my kids, with my parents, I realize that I have to redefine my expectations, right? So if you're expecting your person to perform, act, talk, communicate, do anything the way they did before dementia, you're setting yourself up for failure, right? You're just going to be disappointed. So we have to expect and accept and adapt. Imagine new hopes and dreams. So people sometimes get offended when I talk about this, but it's okay to think about what your life might be like when you're no longer a caregiver. And people get upset because they say, Lori, you're talking about if I have to place my person or when that person dies. I mean, don't talk to me about that. I don't want to hear that. Well, okay, well, I think we had that exercise or something out of our control had that exercise to show us that life is really ambiguous, right? We never know what to expect. So we apologize for the technical difficulties, but I'm going to just go back a little bit to this slide so that you get the sense of where we left off, and our apologies. So guidelines to cope, the attachment may remain, but the relationship is often changed and different. And we have to expect that it's going to be less reciprocal. So guidelines to cope. We have to imagine new hopes and dreams. And this is where I was saying it's okay to think about what your life is going to be like when you're no longer a caregiver, Or maybe you can imagine new hopes and dreams now, right? Many people have done that in the pandemic. They didn't feel comfortable flying, but they felt comfortable taking a road trip. I think, this is an opportunity for you to try to create some balance and also create some pleasure for yourself in imagining new hopes and dreams now and in the future. Take the time to mind yourself. Caring for yourself is not selfish. Instead, it's self-preservation. If you don't take care of yourself, many times people will develop depression, anxiety, really serious isolation, and even health problems. In fact, many family caregivers, all caregivers, but especially caregivers of people with dementia, die before the person they're taking care of because they don't take care of themselves. Take time to catch your breath, ask for and accept help. And sometimes people have to rehearse this, right? It's not something in our culture that we often think about or want to do, right? We think we can handle it all. We have to avoid trying to be perfect. We have to let go of you have to let go of your need for certainty and embrace ambiguity. You have to change your perceptions of a situation or diagnosis that cannot be changed. The goal is not acceptance. It is acceptance. It's not closure, right? This is not the kind of thing that wraps up nicely in a box with a bow. But we can become stronger from adversity, more mature with a greater depth of understanding as a result. We can increase our comfort with ambiguity. We've all done that the last 2 years. We have to find hope in ambiguity. We have to find hope and connection and meaning in a relationship that's changed. And as we've explored, life brings a lot of ambiguity. So Dr. Boss says, when you love someone with dementia, the goal is not perfection. The new standard is for your relationship simply to be good enough. Life with dementia can be less than ideal and still pretty good. And that perceptual change and shift is within your control. So in review, ambiguous loss is a chronic ongoing loss resulting from the ambiguity of absence and presence. It's an irresolvable loss with symptoms similar to complicated grief. It's not pathology, it's a relational condition, and it can cause care partners to feel immobilized and lead to excessive personal and relational stress. Ambiguous loss can be challenging and caregiving can be challenging, but also can be very rewarding. And we can learn to live effectively with ambiguity. And now I'm going to pause.
Lori, thanks so much. It's just a tremendous amount to take in. I think people are doing that. And there was a lot going on with the chat while you were talking. You stress the importance of taking care of oneself during this time. We hope that you are doing the same and finding ways besides wearing holes in your carpet at home. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that we became very aware of over the last 2 years is for everyone, the isolation was very, very difficult. But those who were caring for loved ones who were vulnerable in lots of different ways, but especially those who were living with dementia, they were very afraid of allowing those normal family and community support systems in to help. And so that isolation became more and more increased at that time. And I apologize if you covered for this because I got kicked off a little while during your talk, and I jumped back on. But are there tools or ideas that you have for folks during this time of isolation that people can find ways to help themselves as this goes on?
Yeah, I would say a couple things. One is, just carve out a few minutes of time. I think mindfulness is a great practice. It can be done anytime, anywhere. We actually have a group therapy model for caregivers that's now virtual called Steps to Hope that's been practiced and evidence-based around helping you learn over the course of 5 weeks these tools and how to better take care of yourself. And I'd say sometimes it's just a small adaptation. I had a caregiver that was one, like you described, David, that was afraid at first, some of the programs shut down, right? So some adult day programs and other programs were no longer even available. And then, it was really hard to decide about bringing a family member or caregiver in the house, worried about, the contagion of COVID. And so she decided not to, and she really couldn't leave the house because her husband really needed supervision. So what she did is she actually would leave the house. She would sit in her car during the summer. She would run her air conditioning with the garage door open. And she would often play classical music or do some mindfulness activities for 5 or 10 minutes or even 15 if she could grab it, just to take care of herself. I've had other caregivers who get up before their person does. So the person, as their dementia progresses, they may be sleeping more and getting up early or staying up late after they go to bed so that I can have my quiet time to read the paper and drink my coffee, or to watch a funny sitcom, or to read, or to talk to somebody without being, interrupted. So I think, I think it's hard, it's difficult, but there are lots of ways to find just a few minutes to really take care of yourself, and it's really critical.
I think it is very important. And you just, like you said, it doesn't have to be where you carve out an hour or you carve out 2 hours. It can be, and some people describe it to me as stealing 10 minutes and just finding that little thing that will feed you a little during the day. But I also wanted to lift up things that you were saying too about the importance of being able to name the losses that we're experiencing. Oftentimes that grief can build up and we're not even sure what we're grieving. And the idea of just maybe journaling or being able to state, well, this is what I used to have, and this is what's lost in our relationship, or this is what's lost in my life, and being able to name those or see them can be vitally important to be able then to grieve them and then appreciate the other things. Are there other tricks or practices that you found that helps people be able to recognize what those losses are as they go, and then be able to recognize them and find little ways of acceptance?
Yeah, I think journaling is a great example. I think sometimes keeping a gratitude journal is awesome. Just listing a couple things you're grateful for. Sometimes that's as small as someone held the door open for me, or my person slept an extra half hour, so I got quiet time. I mean, sometimes they're really hard to find when life is very stressful, but just focusing on really positive things is really important. I think, finding ways to connect with other people during this time has been really critical. Whether it's, a phone call or a virtual support group, or meeting up with friends outside in a socially distanced way. I think those are really important things. Someone is asking about memory cafes, and yes, I mean, we actually had 2 memory cafes, one in Tempe and one in Surprise, and we're partnering to launch one in Tucson when the pandemic hit. And so that is a big loss. There are memory cafes that are still going and still going strong. They're virtual. And so I would welcome you to participate in those. But the way we did our memory cafe was really beautiful because people would come together in a community place, like the Tempe Public Library. They would socialize and have coffee and then split off into 2 groups. So they'd be at the same place at the same time, but care partners in one group for education and support, and more of a life enrichment or life engagement activity in another room. So we hope to be able to get to that in person, but there are still lots of activities online. And maybe my colleague Veronica can put this in the chat. We have a great website, banneralz.org. We have lots of life enrichment programs for people and families living with dementia. So we have a Shine Your Light choir that's just taken off fabulously with lots of people participating in this choir virtually. We have a music therapist who's specializes in neurodegeneration who helps lead that effort. We used to have a Passport to Music program where we would do that at the Musical Instrument Museum, but our events and outreach team has just been really creative in creating that virtually, again, through music and talking about different places in the country or in the world, and really bringing that to people. And then there are lots of incredible support groups on our website, and I'm sure on yours, David, that people really should participate in. And if they find themselves really stuck, I think, talking to a social worker, a nurse, finding a counselor, if you're really struggling to implement those new coping skills or even find them, it's a sign of strength to ask for help.
Thank you so much. Maybe we have time for one more question. Somebody asked what you've learned are the best ways that friends of caregivers can provide support.
Oh, that's a great question. So I'm gonna steal a tip from another family caregiver who once told me that people would always say to him, "Give me a call if you need any help," and he was like, "Oh yeah, thanks." And so what he did was he actually sat down and wrote a list. And he wrote this list and came up with half a dozen things that seemed really plausible. So when someone would say, hey, David, is there something I can do to help you? He'd go, yeah, actually. And he'd pull this list out of his pocket and he'd say, this is a handful of things I could use some help with. If any one of them suits you, I would welcome your help. So I thought that was such a creative way of addressing the need for help, especially when people say things fleetingly, to really get down to business and really access some help.
Such a great idea. Lori, thank you so much.
And I think make use of organizations that are out there. There are lots of organizations through churches. There are lots of great hospice organizations like yours that offer both palliative and hospice care to really support person and family. We have area agencies on aging in Tucson. It's the Pima Council on Aging, for example. There are always lots of volunteer and nonprofit groups that are willing to help. And it's a sign of strength to reach out.
This has been such a gift. Thank you so much, Lori, for all that you shared and your willingness to dialogue on this.
Thank you. And thanks for inviting me. And thanks to our participants for sticking with us and managing the technology and, really participating in that exercise that I had you do. I think that's a really hard thing to do, to have two opposing thoughts, and you all did it just so profoundly. It was really impressive. So thank you all for your participation.
Great. I'm going to turn things back over to Julie right now.
Thank you so much, Veronica and Lori and Banner Alzheimer's Institute, for being with us tonight. I did want to just loop back to one of the questions that came up about whether or not the slides would be available. So is that something that we could share with?
Yeah, absolutely. You're welcome to share a PDF of the slides for sure.
Okay. So just for those who haven't been with us, normally what we do is about a week after this event, we will send out the video and any attachments like these slides. So just know that those will be coming to you all. Jen, do we have the PowerPoint that we want to start back up that shows what the upcoming events are? So this is the first of 2022, and we have pretty much, we do this every month, the third Thursday of each month. And in February, I know that we have, it's called, and David, you can jump in here if I get it wrong, Prison Terminal. And it's really all about the hospice movement within the prison system. So there is not, unless the inmates become the caregivers. And so we're going to do a documentary, and then we'll have a Q&A with folks.
Edgar Behrens,
Edgar Behrens, who produced.
Who produced it, he directed it, and then we also have members of the Humane Prison Hospice Project who will be with us to be able to talk about the hospice prison programs, and then also just their experience as well, in order to provide dignity and respect to each and every person as they're facing end of life. And so we'll view the film and then enter into discussion afterwards.
Thank you. I don't know, I disappeared somewhere on the screen. This is the night for crazy things. So anyhow, thank you so much for being with us. I do want to say we we make this series possible for free. And I want to thank those of you who made a donation in support of this work. And I just want to invite you to continue the conversation with us. And thank you so much. I hope you have a lovely evening. Stay healthy, stay happy, and come back and visit us in February. Thanks, everybody.